Okie doke, KOWS 107.3 FM, Occidental, California. On the telephone from Missoula, Montana, I believe we have Dr. Fred W. Allendorf. How do you do?
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon, and thank you, sir, for coming on the show. Looking forward to this session to learn about this fascinating and critically important work that you do. How's things in Missoula? You must know the town pretty good.
I've been here a long time. Things are pretty nice right now. It's a nice, clear day. It's almost the winter solstice.
It is indeed. So let's see. Let me fumble my way to be able to introduce you. Okay. Fred W. Allendorf is a Regents Professor at the University of Montana and a Professorial Research Fellow at Victoria University of Wellington in New Zealand. His primary research interests are conservation and population genetics. He's published over 200 articles on the population genetics and conservation of fish, amphibians, mammals, invertebrates, and plants. He's past president of the American Genetic Association, served as director of the Population Biology Program of the National Science Foundation, and has served on the editorial boards of Conservation Biology, Molecular Ecology, Evolution, Conservation Genetics, Molecular Biology and Evolution, and the Journal of Heredity. How old is that bio?
It's still pretty accurate.
Good. Good.
But I've heard it before.
I bet you have. But you're sticking to it.
Yep, it's too late to change now.
Oh, yes, it is. You have a resume that would choke a horse, to use an old colloquial expression. Let's see here. Born in Philadelphia. You served in Vietnam back in the 60s.
Yes.
You have a Ph.D. from the University of Washington, and you've done postdoctoral work, and you have a lot of honors, and you've on editorial boards and a lot of service and everything that keeps a well-functioning academic functioning well. Oh, no. Oh, Lord. An opening statement, please, Professor Allendorf.
An opening statement? I guess the one part that you perhaps left off was my interest in ecology and Buddhism, and how that fits into my view of the world as an evolutionary biologist.
Okay. Well, I hope we'll hear some about that. You have a magnificent book that you co-authored with is it Gordon Lukart?
Yep. That's
your colleague. It's called Conservation and the Genetics of Populations, and I guess it's a book designed for advanced students in the fields.
Yep, that's correct.
And I wish I could show our listeners the wonderful photograph. What's the story of the photograph here? It's just
I was looking for a cover, and I emailed some friends, and a friend of mine in Alaska knew of the artist who specialized in taking pictures above and below water level. And the cover of the book is a wonderful picture of a sockeye salmon underwater with a grizzly bear above water on the bank of a stream in Alaska.
Right, and the salmon...
It is a pretty amazing photograph.
It's wonderful. Talk about 1,000 words. And the salmon is looking us right in the eye. Okay, so we I guess we mostly identify with the salmon in that photograph.
Well, yeah, I do. When you start off talking about my work, most of my initial work was with fish, salmonids, salmon, and trout.
Yeah.
So I guess sockeye salmon has always been sort of my totem species for a number of different reasons. So yeah, it's a pretty special picture for me.
Mm-hmm. So, the genetic basis of biological problems in conservation. What does that mean?
Oh, it means trying to use all this new knowledge and information we have about genetics and trying to use it to solve problems that we have in conservation. So, for example, one of the local issues here are grizzly bears in Yellowstone National Park. So for the last 100 years, they've been completely isolated from other grizzly bear populations. So one of our concerns is what effect that isolation may have on increased inbreeding and loss of genetic variation in an isolated population like that. So we've used a variety of different techniques, including models and collecting molecular genetic information, trying to determine what should be done about whether that is or is going to be a problem in the future. If it is, what action should be taken. Mm-hmm. And so what we've recommended is that it is a problem being isolated for that long and being that small, and that so when the Fish and Wildlife Service came up with a recovery plan for grizzly bears, they incorporated our recommendations, and if there weren't any grizzly bear movements naturally into Yellowstone Park detected, then they are going to translocate some bears into the park to break down that isolation that's been there for a long time.
Mm-hmm. In the case when we have guests who are high academics, we like to split the difference between them and our ground level lay people like myself. So my interest here is to quote humanize your work, so that our listeners can get a good feel for just how central it is, or how meaningful it is in our developing understanding and in our urgency to address the grievous trajectory of our human Earth presence. Is that you buy that?
Sounds like a good idea to me.
Yeah. So you say extinction is a demographic process.
Yes.
Will you speak
by definition.
Uh-huh. So what does that mean?
So demography is just the study of the reproduction and survival and number of individuals in a population. And so extinction occurs when there aren't any more plant or individuals left in a population, or all the individuals are of the same sex, so they can't reproduce.
Mm-hmm. So yeah, go ahead.
No, go ahead.
That's it. Okay.
It's not profound. It's just that sometimes people have argued between whether genetics or demography is more important for conservation. And so I guess that sentence that you read was written just to show people that I really believe that fundamentally it is a demographic process, mm-hmm. but somehow that understanding the genetics can affect that demographic process.
Right. So what are phenotypes and what are genotypes?
Phenotypes is how individuals look or how they behave, and genotypes is the information that they inherited in the sperm and egg from their mother and their father.
Okay. And you say here, populations are subject to uncontrollable stochastic demographic factors as they become smaller.
So stochastic just means random.
Okay.
So when and there are always random events that occur in our lives and the lives of animals and plants. And so, for example, if there is a very large population and a storm comes along and kills half of the individuals in the population, that going, say, from 1,000 individuals to 500 individuals is not such a strong demographic. It's not going to have a large demographic effect on the population. There's still a lot of individuals left. But many of our species that we're interested in are down to just a handful of individuals in a small area. So a storm comes along, it can by chance kill all the individuals in the population and therefore cause extinction.
Right. When we talk about conservation, what are we talking about?
Conservation refers to trying to maintain the processes and the ecosystems and the species that are currently alive on the Earth. And I guess the most important aspect of conservation is not necessarily trying to save the species, because those species, things have changed over time for 4 billion years. But I think what's really important in terms of conservation is maintaining the processes which our life and the life of all other species on the planet depend upon.
Right. And are we in big trouble?
I think we all know that that's true for a variety of different reasons. And global change is one of them. Habitat loss is another. Increase of outbreaks of new diseases.
Right.
I mean, the litany goes on.
Yes, and there's simultaneously there is an explosion of new information, understanding, technology that allows us to dig much deeper into the heart of the processes themselves. Yes. So this is good news.
That's good news. I guess the bad news, from my perspective, is just how difficult it is to get people, to get people in general to understand and appreciate science and what science is telling us. I mean, I've taught evolutionary biology here at the University of Montana for 35 years. And it's a continual source of frustration that all the polls that people take show that over half the people in this country do not believe that humans came about through a process of evolution from other species. And I think we face the same issues in conservation, things like climate change.
Yeah.
It's so difficult to get people to accept what is the clear facts that the climate is changing, and that to some extent it's partially due to the action of humans. Right. And it's going even scientific understanding is not enough, and I think that's what I see as the main problem. Right. Trying to get people to appreciate and try to act on what we already know. It's not lack of knowledge is not the biggest problem. The biggest problem is getting people to act on that knowledge.
Why should that be such the problem that it is? I mean, being thick-headed isn't a sufficient explanation, is it?
It depends what you mean by thick-headed. I think it's because people are, for one reason or another, attached to the world being a certain way, and no amount of observation or scientific knowledge seems to be able to sway people from that perspective.
Yeah. It probably has something to do with the politics of information dissemination and public understanding and perception. There's probably, I suspect that if we trace it, we're going to find that money is somehow at the root of all of this.
Well, I think part of it, for sure. I think that's true. I think if we look at something like climate, trying to deal with the issues of climate change, I think a lot of it is money.
Yeah.
But when something like evolution, I don't think it comes down to money. I think it comes down to people's view of the role of humans in the world, in the universe, which is probably even a deeper concern than money.
But if reality is the trump card, then perhaps we are not doing a good enough job talking to our fellow humans about reality, about spelling it out sufficiently to to see if anybody's home. I mean, if when I said thick-headed, I mean I try not to think of the human as inherently thick-headed, and that there's some, that this will just if we don't invite reality into the center of our public conversation, we're probably going down and out.
Yes, I agree, and that's why I said this is what I think is really, in terms of conservation, this is probably the biggest concern.
Yeah,
it's as you said, it's communication, and for whatever reason, we haven't been able to do a very good job.
Right, and there is a lot of good news, and there is a best case scenario from where we are right now.
Yes,
we can, everything that's not already permanently destroyed can be regenerated?
To a large extent, yes.
Okay, so we still have a lot of upside if we got our heads screwed on straight.
Yes, if we could somehow find the will to act as a society, there is a lot of potential to deal with a lot of the problems that we're facing. I agree.
What's brand spanking new in the field that excites you?
Well, it depends which field you're talking about.
Conservation biology.
Conservation biology. I guess I have, from my own perspective, it's the information we have now using genomic techniques. Just like genomic techniques are in the process of revolutionizing medicine, I think they also have the potential to revolutionize conservation biology. I think conservation biology, from my perspective, really, it's often helpful to see that it's really parallel to human medicine. But human medicine is just dealing with human health, where conservation biology is also an applied science trying to deal with a larger scale issues. But they're both fundamentally biological problems.
Mm-hmm. We want to conserve biodiversity.
Yes, in order to, as I said, to maintain those ecological processes that we all depend upon. So the air that we breathe, the water that we drink, all those things are produced primarily from the biodiversity that we share the planet with.
What's the Hardy-Weinberg principle?
Now that's from left field. Hardy-Weinberg principle is just a fundamental principle in the genetics of populations. So if individuals are mating with each other at random with regard to their genotypes, then there are certain processes that follow from that that's been called Hardy-Weinberg principle. Hardy was a German physician, and Weinberg was a German physician, and Hardy was an English mathematician, and they both described this in the early 1900s.
Mm-hmm.
Scientists have a knack of naming things naming complicated processes with people's names.
Mm-hmm. Well, it's the least that can be done. These people, as you well know, you slave over a hot pencil all night long. Does all this work? It's all applicable to the human population as well, isn't it?
Well, it depends what you mean by applicable to human population. As I said, the humans are another species in all these ecosystem processes. So trying to provide a situation where humans can live happily and healthily requires having a functioning environment, ecosystem.
I've been hearing a lot lately about epigenetics. Is that a concept or a field? It seems to be a burgeoning field. Does that have any meaning to you in your work?
Yeah, quite a bit. Epigenetics is it's a fairly technical thing to try to describe, but basically it's changes that are inherited from parent to offspring, but that do not, even though it's genetic, it's not a change in the DNA sequence itself. And so, for example, the DNA sequences, every cell in our body has all of the genetic information to make any cell, but within any one cell type, only a few genes are turned on. And epigenetics is one of the things that epigenetics is about, is inheriting whether or not particular regions or genes are turned on.
Mm-hmm.
And so we're just now beginning to understand how those changes in turning on and off genes can really affect the phenotype, to go back to a word that you asked me about before.
Right. So we're talking about the environment. The environment can and does affect genetic expression. And
how, exactly, and those changes in expression can be passed on from parent to child, even though they're not an actual change in the DNA information itself, but the changes, the turning off or turning on genes can be transmitted.
Mm-hmm.
And we're really just beginning to understand it.
Yeah. Dr. Allendorf, I became aware of you through the book Moral Ground. You have an essay in that book, and as the vicissitudes of my library life are such that I don't have the book with me right now, but I have read your essay. And would you tell us a little bit about what you wrote for that book?
Sure. And so I guess when I think about how the way that I viewed the essay that I was requested to write for that book is how to go about making people really change the way they behave in a moral way, so that we really do improve the environment that our children are going to inherit from us. And I guess, as I said at the beginning, during my introduction, I guess part of my view of the world is the similarity between being an evolutionary biologist or a geneticist and the view of the world that the Buddha had. And so I think that the two primary teachings of the Buddha were that everything is connected and that everything is always changing. And from my view, that's just evolutionary ecology. Ecology teaches us that everything is connected. So the oxygen molecules I'm breathing right now, some of them were in breaths that you had breathed sometime in your life, or every other person on the planet. Mm-hmm. And as I said, we're all dependent upon the oxygen produced by plants to maintain our life. And evolution, everything is always changing. I think that's just a fundamental understanding of evolution, that over time that species change. The animals and plants on the planet are changing. Mm-hmm. So I view, in a sense, the teachings of the Buddha, he was an evolutionary ecologist. Mm-hmm. And one of the other fundamental concepts of Buddhism is that we really don't have a separate self, that we only exist in association with everything else in the universe.
Right.
And so what I was trying to do with my essay, I think it's easy to convince people that they really are connected to everything else in terms of the environment. I think that some people have talked about the connection between humans and the river, and if we don't take care of the river, then we're not going to be able to take care of ourselves, because we're dependent upon the river for water and for growing things. And I think that's fairly easy to see that connection. But I think it's more difficult to see the connection between ourselves and the future, and how that trying to see ourselves as part of that evolutionary process and trying to use that realization to not to justify, but to make it clear to people that we really do have responsibility for the future. Not just ourselves in this time, but we really do have responsibility for the future.
Mm-hmm. And we seem to have the capacity, the ability, and the capacity to even, perish the thought, do a good job of it if we would take it on responsibly.
Yeah, I agree, and I think one of the other teachings of the Buddha was that a lot of the time when we don't behave skillfully, it's usually because we're not paying attention. Mm-hmm. And I think if we really pay attention to what we're doing and what the effects of our behaviors are and are going to be, then I think humans are much more likely to be able to change their behavior in a way that's going to have the kinds of positive effects that you're talking about. Mm-hmm. But it's when we don't really pay attention to what we're doing or what the effects are that I think we have more difficulty operating or acting in a skillful way.
Right. As a species, does the human impress you in any way?
Every species impresses me.
Yes, of course, yes.
I think it's just amazing when you look at the way, no matter what species you pick, it's just amazing. Humans obviously are exceptional in our ability of self-awareness, but I think you also have to realize that humans have only been around, in any sense, have only been around for a few million years. Our life has been around for 4 billion years, mm-hmm. Or at least 3 billion years. And so this change, this process of awareness is a fairly recent evolutionary change, looking at all the species on the planet.
Right.
And I guess that's really the way that humans do impress me in comparison to all the other species.
Uh-huh. Did you note the passing of Dr. Margulis?
Yes, I did.
Yeah.
Although she wasn't a very big fan of population genetics.
No.
But yes, she made a lot of amazing contributions to our understanding mm-hmm. of evolution.
What seemed to be the dispute about population genetics?
I don't really... I think she was more interested in deeper problems mm-hmm. than in population genetics. So population genetics is primarily interested in things going on right now or from generation to generation. And obviously her interests were really looking back in deep time and what happened a billion years ago, which population genetics isn't very informative about.
Right. How old?
I guess I'm more interested in what's going on right now. Mm-hmm. It's more difficult for me to understand things that happened. I have enough difficulty understanding what happened today, let alone what happened a billion years ago.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Well, we only have one life to live at a time, and we make our bed and sleep in it.
And I think we have to follow our passions, and I think sometimes we don't necessarily understand our passions, but I think that's important.
What were the roots of your passion in this that you've that brought you to this work?
I can't analyze them. I just know when I first took genetics as a young student undergraduate, I remember going home that night and saying to my wife that this is what I want to do for the rest of my life.
Wow.
I can't understand why, but
that's pretty great. That's wonderful. Was it one particular class? Was it a moment? I was taking an anthropology class, and
we had a class talking about population genetics, and it just really struck me that that's what I wanted to do with the rest of my life.
Yeah. Who was the teacher?
I don't remember.
Uh-huh.
I was a freshman. It was one of those courses you had to take for distribution. I was a chemical engineer major at the time.
Wow. How old were you when you left Philadelphia?
I went in the Army when I was 17.
Oh. Let's see. What are alletes and gametes?
Gametes are sperm and eggs.
Okay.
And what was the first word that you said?
Alleles.
Oh, alleles, probably.
Oh, is that right? I could swear I faithfully...
Alleles, I would think.
Yeah, it's not. There's no alletes.
Not that I'm aware of. No.
All right. Okay.
So alleles are just different forms of the same gene. Mm-hmm. So I think the most common example everybody knows about is blood groups. Yeah. So there are 3 alleles. There's an A allele, a B allele, and an O allele. And so everybody inherits some combination of those alleles from their mother and their father through the gametes, the sperm and the eggs.
Okay. What's genetic drift?
Genetic drift is random changes in populations over time, just by chance.
I'm not leafing through the book. I actually took notes.
Well, I can tell since you asked about elites.
Uh-huh.
So genetic drift is a big concern in conservation because when populations get small, as we talked about before, random events become more important. And so there are alleles which are harmful that are usually at low frequencies because natural selection selects against them. But when populations become very small, natural selection becomes less efficient, and therefore some of these harmful alleles can increase in frequency and cause lots of problems. So California condor, a species near where you are right now, was down to about 12 or 13 individuals, and one of those individuals, just by chance, had an allele or a gene that caused dwarfism. So in the historical population, that allele was very rare, but just because of chance events now in California condor populations through the captive breeding, that allele has reached high frequencies, and it's a concern with trying to recover the California condor.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Who was Sewell Wright?
Sewell Wright was...
I'm really glad I amused you because...
these questions are just coming from all over the place. I feel like you know what?
When it's a special... I love having guests who are specialists, or if that's not an insult, or whose work is the word escapes me. Esoteric or highly academic, and to be able to invite people like yourself to talk to us, it's a real treat.
Oh, good.
So at least one of us is enjoying this. Anyway,
I feel like I'm taking my comprehensive exam, sitting around the room and people ask me questions. So who was Sewell Wright?
Well, I'm working the body.
Sewell Wright was the primary population geneticist of the 20th century, and so. The esoteric is an interesting word. Sewell Wright started off working for the U.S. Department of Agriculture, and he was involved in trying to use genetics to develop more productive cattle, dairy cattle, more larger chickens, to apply genetics to animal breeding. And then he eventually left USDA and had a position at the University of Chicago, retired from the University of Chicago, then went to the University of Illinois, and he finally died at about 98. He was still writing books in his 90s.
Uh-huh.
But I like that example because in my own work, although a lot of what we do really is esoteric, I guess it's the part of my work that really has fundamental application to humans, which I think is really important.
Mm-hmm.
And Sewell Wright represented that in his work.
Mm-hmm.
He was initially, as I said, worked for the Department of Agriculture.
Yeah.
So I think genetics has always had this sort of esoteric side of it, which is highly mathematical and theoretical, and also trying to apply those principles to problems and to human problems, whether it's in medicine or agriculture or in conservation.
Yeah, there's a box right at the end of the book. I guess there's a chapter on mathematics. I don't recall. You quote James F. Crow. He said, population genetics used to have a theory that was too rich for the data. That is no longer true. So...
Yeah, for years, there was... population genetics has always appealed to very theoretical people. So R.A. Fisher, who actually invented most of the a lot of the statistical tests that you learned about when you went in school, he was a population geneticist. But we didn't have any way that we could actually go out and look at genes. So Crow's referring to that we had all this theory, but we didn't have any way that we could go out and actually test it. But now there are modern techniques of being able to sequence complete human genomes or genomes of any species that we want. Now, the opposite is almost true. We're overwhelmed with information, but trying to understand all that information is really difficult. It's like now we used to be drinking out of a fire hose that was dripping, and now all of a sudden the fire hose is turned on full bore, and we're being overwhelmed by all the genomic information which is coming at us.
Right. Are you finding enough students who are game?
Yes, I think there's a lot of interest in genetics and conservation.
Yeah.
I think the skills, though, being able to deal with mathematics and bioinformatics and computer sciences, as that the little box that you're referring to by Jim Crow, I mean, that's what that alludes to. It really is difficult to have the skills to really be able to deal with these issues.
Right. There's a chapter called Metapopulations and Fragmentation. Yeah?
Yes.
Will you speak about that a little bit, please?
Well, fragmentation is just the loss of habitat. And so many of the species here, California is a beautiful, I was going to say beautiful, but maybe an ugly example of that, where that species that used to be continuously distributed in California now exist in these little pockets of protected habitat. And so when populations get small and isolated due to fragmentation, then that's when they're more susceptible to extinction, and they're more susceptible to genetic problems associated with inbreeding because of the small numbers of individuals. So metapopulation just means population of populations. It just means trying to somehow reconnect those populations in a way that they will be viable and be able to persist in the future.
The humans are now about 7 billion. What do you have a sense of what would be optimal for us, or do you have a sense, do you have a sense of how many people we can really handle here?
Well, I'm certainly not in a position not qualified to answer that, okay. But certainly people that have thought about this that I really respect think that the number is much less than 7 billion in a sustainable way.
Yeah. Generally speaking, I guess you're more or less a level-headed man. Do you have do you despair for the human prospect? And on the other hand, do you have any bouts of recent hope? is there any evidence through your eyes that we are getting a grip on our most serious, dangerous problems?
Well, certainly there are examples where a lot of problems, things really are a lot better now than they were a few years ago. So I think that's clear, but I guess getting a grip, sort of means I'm not sure we have a grip on it yet.
Yeah.
And I think that, as I said, and when I become, what makes me most despair is when I just realize how difficult it is to convince people to really what we need to do and to really understand the underlying science. Because I think if we don't really understand the problems, then we can't really deal with those problems. And as long as so many people refuse to really, as you say, as long as so many people are thick-headed and not really willing to try to acknowledge and understand the underlying problems, I think as a society it's going to be difficult to deal with them. So that's what makes me most despair.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
But I guess I'm also, it's hard to predict the future, hard to know what's going to happen. And I guess I've always liked the Zen story about the farmer who his horse ran away.
Yeah.
And he was completely depressed because that horse was his source of income, and losing the horse was the worst thing you can imagine happened. And then a week later, the horse came back, and the horse came back with 2 more horses. Mm-hmm. So then he was elated because the horse came back. And then his son tried to ride one of the new horses that came back, wild horses that came back with his old horse. And his son fell off and broke his leg. And then he despaired because his son had broken his leg, and how terrible it was that the horse came back, and his son ended up breaking his leg. Mm-hmm. Then the military came to draft people, and they wanted to take his son away, but they couldn't take his son away because he had a broken leg. And so the moral of the story from my eyes is we don't really know what the consequences are going to be of things that are happening around us.
That's right.
And I think all we can try to do is behave in a way that we think is correct, mm-hmm. and do the best that we can.
Yeah. You have a Buddhist practice.
Yes.
You've had it for many, many years.
Yes.
There's a new book that came to my attention called The Bodhisattva's Brain by a man named Owen Flanagan, who we're going to have on the show. And he sent me a copy of the book, and I'm just mentioning it because I suspect you would find it very interesting.
It sounds familiar, but I'm not sure if I've seen it. But I will take a look at it after.
Yeah, it's. I reference it because it's pitched at a pretty highly intelligent level. What can I say? Dr. Allendorf,
yep.
I've gone through my notes. We have a really we have a fine listenership. They really our listeners listen to these interviews because what we want to do is invite teachers to come and talk to us to share. What they have to share with us, and this is what our audience enjoys. So, what do you suppose our listeners would need to know or want to know that we haven't touched on in the last 40 minutes?
I have no idea. Nothing comes to mind.
Okay, good. It's a very...
I think you've covered a lot of ground in your question.
You know, I do the best I can, and I'm hoping. You know, I go home and then I listen to these things because I can't really tell when they're actually happening. Mm-hmm. I listen to them, and invariably they're better than I feared. So I suspect that we had a good chat, and that it would be worth listening to.
Okay.
And I appreciate you very much coming and talking to us.
Well, I appreciate you calling me and interviewing me. And as you said, I enjoyed it quite a bit.
Good.
A lot of fun.
Well, can't ask for more than that.
No.
I appreciate people who do valuable work in this world because it's done on all our behalves, and you certainly, the work you do is right in the heart of what we want, what we all want here. We want a healthy, strong, happy world, and that includes that is the biological world, and that's the work that you do. That's where your heart is.
Yep.
So.
Well, thank you. I appreciate your comment.
Okay. Thank you very much.
Sure.
Take care.
Bye.
Fred W. Allendorf in Missoula, Montana. Let's see. Fred Allendorf. Division of Biological Sciences. Also, Wellington, New Zealand, the School of Biological Sciences. Many awards, grants, lots of grants. Okay. Member of many different societies.